Cain and Abel, the first murder case, a forensic, criminological, and some theological aspects. Today we're stepping into one of the oldest recorded crime scenes in human history, the murder of Abel by his brother Cain. Whether you read this as literal history, sacred narrative, or archetypal story, the account in Genesis gives us a fascinating window into early human violence, divine justice, and what might be the first example of forensic investigation. In this episode, we'll explore the case through the lens of modern forensic science, criminology, and God's restorative justice, asking, what clues does the text give us about the crime scene? How does God's response mirror the roles of judge, prosecutor, investigator, and rehabilitator? And what can this ancient narrative teach us about justice today? Let's begin. Cain and Abel are the first children of Adam and Eve. Abel becomes a keeper of flocks. Cain works the soil. Both bring offerings to God. Abel's is accepted, Cain's is not. The text doesn't specify why. Some says Cain's intentions were ungodly or less holy and unacceptable to the Creator's mind. In Genesis 4:3-5. In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to Adonai from the produce of the soil. Abel, too, brought from the firstborn of his sheep, including their fat. Adonai accepted Abel and his offering, but did not accept Cain and his offering. But the emotional impact is clear: anger, jealousy, and wounded pride. In criminology, these are classic precursors to affective or emotional homicide, killings driven by intense, immediate emotion rather than long-term planning. Cain's internal state is described vividly. His face falls, his emotions overwhelm him. God warned him about sin crouching at the door, it wants you. A metaphor for escalating impulses. This is the earliest depiction of risk assessment, a warning that violence is imminent if emotional regulation fails. The murder. Narrator. The text is brief. Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. There are no details about the weapon, the method, or the location, but we can infer several things using forensic logic. Possible scene reconstruction. The phrase "rose up" suggests close range, interpersonal violence, as farmers and herders both had access to primitive tools: stones, wooden implements, or cutting tools. The killing likely occurred in the field, away from witnesses. Forensic indicators, hypothetical. If this were a modern case, investigators would look for blood spatter patterns to determine force and direction, tool marks on bone, signs of struggle, locational evidence such as disturbed soil or drag marks. The narrative doesn't give these details, but the simplicity of the account aligns with blunt force trauma or sharp force trauma, the most common forms of early human violence. God as the first forensic investigator. Narrator. After the murder, God asks Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" This is not a request for information. It's an investigative technique. Firstly, the investigative question. God begins with an open-ended question, similar to modern forensic interviewing. It tests Cain's truthfulness. It gives Cain a chance to confess. It establishes a baseline for deception. Cain responds, "I don't know, am I my brother's keeper?" This is evasion, deflection, and minimization, behaviors commonly seen in offenders who are not ready to accept responsibility. The forensic revelation God then states, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." This is a poetic but forensic-sounding line. In modern terms, it implies physical evidence exists. The crime scene speaks. The truth is embedded in the environment. This is the earliest conceptualization of trace evidence, the idea that every contact leaves a trace, a principle later formalized by Edmund Locard. God as judge, prosecutor, and sentencer. Narrator. Once guilt is established, God moves into the judicial phase. The prosecutorial statement, God outlines the consequences. The ground will no longer yield its strength. Cain will become a wanderer. This is both punitive and symbolic. The land which Cain worked becomes a reminder of the crime. The wandering reflects social exile, a common ancient punishment. The sentencing, unlike modern courts, there is no prison, no execution, no corporal punishment. Instead, the sentence is banishment, loss of livelihood, social displacement. In ancient societies, exile was equivalent to removing someone from the protection of the community, a severe but non-lethal consequence. The protective mark Cain fears retaliation. God responds by placing a mark on him so that no one will kill him. This is extraordinary. It shows God acting not only as judge but also as protector, ensuring the punishment does not escalate into a cycle of violence. In modern criminology, this resembles rehabilitation safeguards, protection from vigilante justice, recognition of offender rights, Cain's possible rehabilitation. After the sentencing, Cain leaves and eventually builds a city. This suggests he reintegrates into society, he becomes productive, he contributes to civilization. This is a form of post-offense rehabilitation. Modern parallels today, rehabilitation may include counseling, anger management, restorative justice programs, community reintegration, skills training. Cain's story shows that even after severe wrongdoing, the narrative allows space for growth, contribution, legacy. This is a surprisingly modern view of criminal justice. Comparing ancient and modern forensic protocols. Let's compare the Genesis account with today's investigative standards. Crime scene investigation. Ancient narrative. Evidence is symbolic, blood cries out. Investigator is omniscient, modern practice. Scene preservation, documentation, chain of custody, biological and trace evidence analysis. Interviewing the suspect, ancient narrative. Open-ended questioning. Assessment of deception. Modern practice. Peace model, cognitive interviewing. Avoiding coercion. Trauma-informed approaches. Sentencing, ancient narrative. Exile, loss of livelihood. Divine protection. Modern practice. Imprisonment. Probation. Restorative justice. Rehabilitation programs. Justice God as the first justice dispenser. In this story, God embodies multiple roles. Investigator, identifying the truth. Prosecutor, presenting the charge judge, determining guilt. Sentencer, imposing consequences. Protector, preventing further harm. Rehabilitator, allowing Cain to rebuild his life. This holistic model blends accountability, mercy, and restoration, a combination many modern justice systems still struggle to achieve. Conclusion. The story of Cain and Abel is more than a moral tale. It's a window into the earliest human understanding of violence, responsibility, and justice. When viewed through forensic and criminological lenses, it becomes a profound exploration of human emotion, crime, and consequence. The balance between justice and mercy, and the possibility of rehabilitation even after catastrophic failure. Whether you approach this story spiritually, academically, or symbolically, it continues to challenge our assumptions about what justice should look like, then, now, and into the future. Yan ang kagandahan ng forensic science, criminology, and God's care for all humans, sinner or saint. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient narratives through modern forensic science, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. See you in the next episode. In John 3:12 New International Version Bible, it says 19, "Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother." And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. Today we revisit the world's earliest recorded homicide, the murder of Abel by his brother Cain. Whether you see this as literal history or sacred narrative, it offers a fascinating lens for forensic science and criminology. Ngayon babalikan natin ang pinakaunang naitalang pagpatay sa kasaysayan. Ang pagpatay ni Cain sa kanyang kapatid na si Abel. Anuman ang pananaw mo, nagbibigay ito ng napakayamang lente para sa forensic science at criminology. Context of the crime/konteksto ng krimen. Cain farms the land. Abel tends flocks. Both offer gifts to God, but Abel's is accepted and Cain's is not. This emotional wound becomes the seed of violence. Si Cain ay magsasaka, si Abel ay pastol. Pareho silang naghandog, ngunit tinanggap ang kay Abel at hindi ang kay Cain. Dito nagsimula ang selos, galit at pagkadismaya, mga klasikong risk factors para sa effective homicide. God warns Cain, sin is crouching at the door. This is an early form of risk assessment. Binalaan siya ng Diyos. Ang kasalanan ay nakaabang. Para itong unang bersyon ng violence risk assessment. Ang pagpatay, the text says, Cain rose up against Abel and killed him. No weapon is named, but we can infer close-range violence. Sabi ng teksto, tumindig si Cain laban kay Abel at pinatay niya ito. Walang detalyeng ibinigay, pero malinaw na malapitan at personal ang pag-atake. Forensic reconstruction, likely weapons, stones, wooden tools, farming implements. Posibleng ginamit, bato, kahoy o kasangkapang pangbukid. A modern investigator would look for blood spatter, tool marks, and disturbed soil. Kung modernong investigasyon ito, hahanapin ang blood spatter, tool marks, at bakas ng pakikipagbuno. God as the first forensic investigator / ang Diyos. Bilang unang investigador 5-8, God asks, "Where is your brother Abel?" This is an investigative technique, an open-ended question to test truthfulness. Tinanong ng Diyos, "Nasaan ang iyong kapatid?" Ito ay parang forensic interview, open-ended, hindi leading, at sinusuri ang honesty. Cain lies, "I don't know." God responds, "Your brother's blood cries out from the ground." Nagsinungaling si Cain, "Hindi ko alam." Sagot ng Diyos, "Sumisigaw ang dugo ng iyong kapatid mula sa lupa." Forensic meaning, this implies trace evidence. The scene itself reveals the truth. Ito ang unang konsepto ng trace evidence. Ang ebidensya ay nagsasalita. God as judge, prosecutor, sentencer / Diyos. Bilang hukom, prosecutor at tagapaghatol. Ang paratang God outlines the consequences. The ground will resist Cain. He will become a wanderer. Ipinahayag ng Diyos ang parusa, hindi na magbibigay ng ani ang lupa at magiging palaboy si Cain. Ang hatol, no execution, no imprisonment. Instead, exile. Walang bitay, walang kulungan. Ang parusa, pagpapatapon. The protective mark, God marks Cain so no one kills him, a balance of justice and mercy. Nilagyan ng Diyos ng tanda si Cain upang hindi siya patayin ng iba. Kombinasyon ng hustisya at awa. Cain's rehabilitation / ang posibleng rehabilitasyon. Ni Cain later builds a city, evidence of reintegration and productivity. Nagtayo pa siya ng isang lungsod, patunay ng reformation at reintegration. Modern parallels rehabilitation today includes counseling, anger management, and restorative justice. Sa ngayon kasama sa rehabilitasyon ng counseling, anger management, at restorative justice programs. Ancient versus modern forensics / sinauna versus makabagong forensics crime scene investigation. Ancient symbolic evidence, modern chain of custody, documentation, biological analysis. Sinauna, simbolikong ebidensya, makabago, chain of custody, dokumentasyon, biological at trace analysis. Interviewing ancient, open-ended questioning. Modern, peace model, cognitive interviewing. Sinauna, bukas na tanong, Makabago, peace model, cognitive interview, sentencing ancient exile, modern imprisonment, probation, rehabilitation, sinauna, pagpapatapon. Makabago, kulungan, probation, rehabilitasyon. God as justice dispenser/Diyos bilang tagapagbigay ng hustisya. God acts as investigator, prosecutor, judge, sentencer, protector, and rehabilitator. Ang Diyos ang investigador, taga-usig, hukom, tagapagpataw ng parusa, tagapagtanggol, at tagapagbigay ng pagkakataong magbago. This holistic model blends accountability and mercy. Pinagsasama nito ang pananagutan at awa, isang balanse na hinahangad pa rin ng modernong hustisya. Conclusion. The Cain-Abel case is more than a moral story. It's an early exploration of violence, justice, and rehabilitation. Ang kaso ni Cain at Abel ay higit pa sa moral na kwento. Isa itong sinaunang pag-aaral tungkol sa karahasan, hustisya, at pagbabago. If you enjoyed this forensic theological deep dive, like and subscribe. Kung nagustuhan mo ang ganitong forensic theological analysis, huwag kalimutang mag-like at mag-subscribe. In Hebrews 11:4 makes a brief reference to the Cain and Abel story. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain's. Through this he received approval as righteous, God himself giving approval to his gifts. He died, but through his faith he still speaks. Abel, the first murder victim, is sometimes seen as the first martyr, while Cain, the first murderer, is sometimes seen as an ancestor of evil. Some scholars suggest the pericope may have been based on the Sumerian myth of Enlil and Enki, with Enlil in Cain's role and Enki in Abel's. Modern scholars typically view the stories of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel to be about the development of civilization during the age of agriculture. Not the beginnings of man, but when people first learned agriculture, replacing the ways of the hunter-gatherer. 6. It has also been seen as a depiction of nomadic conflict, the struggle for land and resources, and divine favor between nomadic herders and sedentary farmers. The academic theologian Joseph Blenkinsop holds that Cain and Abel are symbolic rather than real. Like almost all of the persons, places and stories in the primeval history, the first 11 chapters of Genesis, they are mentioned nowhere else in the Hebrew Bible, a fact that for some scholars suggests that the history is a late composition attached to Genesis to serve as an introduction. The date is also disputed. The history may be as late as the Hellenistic period, first decades of the 4th century BCE, or as early as the 9th to 8th centuries BCE. But the high level of Babylonian myth behind its stories has led others to date it to the Babylonian exile, 6th century BCE. A prominent Mesopotamian parallel to Cain and Abel is Enlil chooses, the farmer god, 15, in which the shepherd god Emesh and the farmer god Enten bring their dispute over which of them is better to the chief god Enlil, 16, who rules in favor of Enten, the farmer. All of the above shows how the divine forgiveness, divine salvation, divine protection, divine grace, and divine mercy are upon us humans, sinner or saint.